Welcome back to the Rogue Wave podcast, frequency for all things pop culture. Okay, last segment. We just talked briefly about Deadpool. This segment coming up, again, it's an MCU double feature. Which one do you want to tackle? Do you want to tackle Black Widow, or do you want to tackle Loki season finale? Now, season finale obviously was this morning or 3:00 in the morning last night. Black Widow's been out for a weekend.
Widow came first week.
What's that? We'll do Black Widow? I can't hear you.
Why don't we do Black Widow?
There you go. Couldn't hear you. It's an innocent. Don't give me a face.
You know why you can't hear me? Because you're always running your mouth while I'm talking.
Well, that's possible too. I'm not going to discount that possibility. That is also the reason I couldn't hear you.
I think it's more than a possibility at this point.
Do you think? I think I just got to turn my speakers up a little bit more, and then I can hear you. Okay. So Black Widow finally hit theaters, and I say finally, obviously, because unexpected coronavirus intervention last year pushed it all the way back to 2021, and it not only did it perform well from a audience perspective, but from a financials perspective, it broke, post-pandemic box office records. So previously held by F9, made about 80 million in theaters, which was great.
Yeah.
It also made additional, I think, close to 80 in the Disney Plus Premiere slot. Now, you chose to watch it in the Disney Plus Premiere slot. What was your experience watching this film that way versus me? I did it in the theaters, and I'll tell you what my experience was after, but I'm curious.
How can I know what my experience is versus your
No. I'm asking you, what was your experience watching a debut MCU film from home?
I thought it was pretty awesome. Like I woke up, I don't know, early in the morning, like 8 or 9 in the morning, and I was able to watch an A-list, brand new premiere movie, in the comfort of my own home without having to deal with travel, or dealing with any of the other pitfalls of going to the movie theater to see something. So I thought it was great. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience of watching it at that capacity. I also enjoy the experience of watching it exactly when I felt like watching it, as opposed to someone else's time schedule.
That's true. And what's funny about the new system that we have too, where or I don't want to say it's a new system because it might be a temporary thing, although the money it made kind of indicates that, this Premiere Pass idea is here to stay. It was an interesting thing to watch this film, but it be a prequel where it kind of fit in between films. And now, obviously, spoilers, if anyone hasn't seen Endgame, we know that Black Widow is obviously not she's not making it, and it was evidenced in the end credit scene when we see her tombstone, or they show her tombstone in the end credit scene. So we obviously know how it ends. What was fascinating to me is it was great to be back in theaters. That was the first thing. It was actually excellent to experience it. I saw a 12:30 showing, and it was a pretty packed theater. And that was pretty cool. Mainly because now what they've done with the AMC theaters anyway is, you get the recliner seats. There was spacing kind of going on. You don't feel like you're on top of one another anyway, at least in the AMC theaters that I've been to in the last few years. They've done a nice job of, kind of creating a good atmosphere to sit and watch a movie. The surround sound was great. The actual visceral experience of it was great. But what was funny about it was, because this was nudged in, and because we know there's no Black Widow 2, or at least there's no Black Widow 2 beyond where the story goes beyond Avengers Endgame, I actually felt like I was watching a movie I had just missed. Like I had just missed it. Like this came out. I feel like it came out 5 years ago, and I just happened to be now watching it in the theaters. It was a weird, surreal kind of feeling. Whereas I think if I was home, it would be like watching Ant-Man. I never watched Ant-Man in the theaters, right? I only watched Ant-Man after the fact when it had come out, because I didn't really, we weren't doing a podcast back then. And I was like, I can wait on Ant-Man. And I did. And it's one of those things like, all right, now I've watched it. That's great. Now it fits into the canon. Did that feel like that for you watching it at home?
No.
No, it felt like something brand new.
Did it feel like what? Did I feel like I was
in the past a little bit? Like that's actually where I felt. I actually felt like I was in the past a little bit. I actually felt like this was 2017 or something like that. But it was a weird thing because I'm in the theaters. I wouldn't have watched. It's like, wow, how did I miss this when it first came out in theaters? And why am I in a theater watching it? You're at home watching something. Did it feel as if you were, you said it was something brand new and fresh, but did it feel brand new being at home?
I said it felt brand new and fresh, right? So yeah, I guess it did, didn't it? Or you're saying I shouldn't have? Or
no, I'm not saying you should have. I'm asking you, like, was there anything where you're watching? Was there any point where you're watching this where it just felt like this is something you missed versus it being like a brand new movie? Like almost, like when you have, or was it watching like Rogue One for you? Where Rogue One takes place in between.
Yes.
Okay. Because I didn't get that feeling from this. I didn't get the Rogue One feeling. I got more of like, well, it's weird. I feel like I just missed this movie. Like it didn't feel like it didn't offer anything to the same way that Rogue One to me felt like a brand new story that fit within a pocket. This more or less felt like I just kind of missed this. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just saying it was a weird feeling.
No, I know, but it's just a unique feeling to you.
Yes.
I don't know how to. If you tell me that's how you felt about it, then yeah, all right, that's the thing. So did that ruin the experience for you, or?
No, it didn't ruin it. It definitely felt different, right? It was a different experience watching.
Well, aren't they all supposed to feel different every time you see a movie? Aren't you supposed to feel differently about it? If you felt the same watching a movie every time you saw a new movie, then that would probably be the fault of the medium, or the material, as opposed to who you are and
I think the experience though feels similar, and that's not to say that has nothing to do with the content of the movie. The content of the movie was highly enjoyable, right? I mean, I think ultimately that there was a lot of flaws in the villain, in the big bad villain at the end. I had a lot of questions about him and Red Guardian. I don't understand why Red Guardian was.
All right, now we're talking about the movie itself.
Yes.
Now, as opposed to
okay.
Yes. All right.
I thought it was a good enough segue to get into the actual movie.
Yeah, I'm sure you felt that way. Go ahead.
But as much as I enjoyed, or as much as I had questions about the villain, and as much as I had some questions about his involvement with Red Guardian, and a lot of that didn't quite make a whole lot of sense. I felt like the dynamic between Black Widow and her sister and the, quasi mom and Red Guardian as the father figure was enough for me to enjoy the film as a whole. What was your reaction?
Yeah, I thought they were, the only issue I really had was that, with all the, they spent so much time like milking a lot of bluster out of Red Guardian, and they never got to show him like have a triumphant moment. So that was my kind of only issue. But yeah, I thought, of course it's David Harbour and it's Rachel Weisz and it's like Scarlett Johansson. So of course I'm gonna and Ray Winstone, even though I do get it, but I mean Marvel always has problems with their villains because Marvel is a very hero driven medium. It's very superhero driven medium.
Yeah.
And each of these superheroes always runs into like a little bit of an obstacle. But I think who's the most powerful Marvel cinematic villain, with the exception of Thanos?
I was just going to say Thanos.
Loki.
It's got to be Loki at this point, right? Or the most memorable, right?
Well, he's the long running one, right? Yeah. So like he's the only one that we get so much screen time with that we actually understand that person to the point where they gave him his own show.
Yeah.
But it's not a villains driven, it's not a villains driven media. And to be honest with you, a lot of the Marvel villains, even in a comic book form, are just temporary obstacles for our heroes. They're not, there's not a lot long-term investment in villains It's not like they don't. There's no equivalent of a Marvel Joker,
Right.
where there's long-term investment into the psychology of that particular character and the pathology of what his his worldview is, right? We
That's
don't
a
really
good
have
point.
deep dives or deep studies into that. So
Yeah.
you may have an equivalent of that of a villain, like you'll have the Green Goblin for Spider-Man,
Mm-hmm.
but have we dove really deeply over the 50 or so years that the Green Goblin's been around
Mm-hmm.
into like what makes the Green Goblin, or do we basically get the same answer all the time? It's like Osborn kind of overdid it, and then became this, and I mean that's about it. That's all. That's as deep as it gets, right?
Right.
There's no look back into who the Joker was in his many incarnations, whether it's Jack Napier or it's whatever you want to call it, and whether or not the Joker was a gangster or a petty thief, or was he blackmailed or cajoled into that job that he did where he accidentally fell into a vat of chemicals and he came out as like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. It's just so much stuff to it that some of the details in the retelling are changed,
Yeah.
but it's ultimately the same story. And Marvel really doesn't have villains like that. I mean, Thanos, Thanos' original motivation was trying to get a date with death. That's how deep it went. It didn't really go deeper than that. The movies had to give
the movies
that
actually
kind of,
gave
that
him
level
more
of depth.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, we don't really have that. So I don't mind the Ray Winstone. I'm kind of used to that. Like, okay, he's the heavy. They don't really have villains. They have heavies. This guy is a heavy for this particular story. And then we get the hero's got to defeat or come to terms with the heavy in some way, and then the hero gets to move on to the next thing. And that's pretty much the Marvel format. So, with that in mind, and if you're going to get a heavy, get Ray Winstone, do that.
No, he was, the performance was really good. I was curious as to if he can train all these female assassins and they're in the building. Why does he even need guards? Like, why wouldn't they just be the guards? Like, I wasn't sure about that one.
Sometimes your female assassins go bad. I don't know.
There were like little things. I'm like,
why
man,
are there different kinds of stormtroopers? Why not just use one kind of stormtrooper for every occasion?
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Well, why would there be different stormtroopers? That's the best part.
It's just an aesthetic.
Yeah.
Because once the Black Widows, spoiler, once they all, got woken up from their trances, you still needed a squad of baddies for the heroes to kill, because you can't be killing Black Widows if you're
right. I know. That was.
So that's probably why. That's probably a problem they came across in the design stage. It's like, okay, well, we're just going to need some generic faceless villains so that we can shoot a whole bunch of people, because it doesn't make any sense for for Scarlett Johansson to mow down a room full of people if she's there to save them. So
yeah. Let me ask you the big question too that I think people were asking online afterwards. The Red Guardian by far was just extremely enjoyable, right? I mean, he was an enjoyable, affable guy, even though he was doing really horrible things, but he seemed to, even his motivation for doing horrible things was like, all right, he's crazy, but that's his thing. I get it. He talks about fighting Captain America. Did you in your head try to piece together the MCU timeline to see if he could have actually fought Captain America at any point? Because everyone keeps talking about whether or not he did. Have you weighed in your mind about whether or not that is true, or he was just kind of telling a fib?
Well, there have been various different Captain Americas. They already established that with Falcon and Winter Soldier. So it's very possible that he fought Captain America, or unless they didn't really do a deep dive into Red Guardian's background. Does he go back to the 40s? Is he, because of the super soldier serum? Is he that old? It didn't seem to be that old, right? So we're talking the 60s, the 50s, and the 60s, if not the 60s, right? The 60s, early 70s, right? In a timeline for Scarlett Johansson to be how old she is. So or the 80s. We have to be talking about the 80s.
Yeah.
So, if he's talking about it when he was in his prime was the 70s and the 80s, he must have been either fighting a different Captain America or
Right.
he was lying. I'm pretty sure because of the way Marvel utilizes its material that he's not lying, and that we're going to discover that there were several Captain Americas.
I'm curious about that.
He fought someone that he thought was Captain America, that he thought was the Steve Rogers Captain America, but he actually fought another Captain America.
Or it begs the question. We just always assumed in First Avenger he waked up. See, that's the non-drinking brain. That he woke up in 2011 or 2012 with the Avengers movie. Is it possible? It's my Ancient Aliens talk. Is it possible that he had woken up prior to that?
No, I don't know. Maybe. But I mean, it's also possible when he went back in time and stayed with Peggy Carter that he still continued to be, Captain America. I guess. I don't know. I'm pretty sure we'll find out. It's kind of like why it took 5 years to bring everybody back between Infinity War and Endgame, and they've made quite a lot of story material out of those 5 years. Even though you said it was stupid for them.
Oh, I still don't like it. I still don't like the decision of 5 years.
Yeah, but you're wrong about that. That's clear.
I think you could have done the same story material within 1 year.
But why would you have to?
I think because I think what it does,
you can do whatever you want.
What it does is, I think it opens up a can of worms in terms of things that don't make sense. They literally did it just so Tony Stark could have a daughter. I think that was the motivation. And then the after effect of that was, oh, hey, by the way, we have 5 years to play with. But but you know how eagle-eyed fandom can be. They're going to be pointing out these things because it happens. It's just it happens. It's going to be
something that doesn't make sense because of the blip.
What's that?
Name something that doesn't make sense because of the blip.
Oh, well, I can't. I haven't been drinking this week. So clearly I don't have my wits about me. I can't do it. No, I'll think about that. I'll think about something that doesn't necessarily make sense, because there was definitely a couple things in Endgame where I sat there going, that doesn't quite make sense. I'd have to go rewatch Endgame, and I'd have to sit through.
Well, no. We're not talking about whether Endgame makes sense. We're talking about whether.
No, there was things, but that's my point though. There were things already right off the bat in Endgame that didn't make sense, and 5 years was one of the reasons behind it. Where I'm sitting there going, I'm not quite sure. Look, I'm not saying that they can't make positive storytelling or story ideas based on the 5 years. Of course they can, and they do it very well. I'm not, that was never the thing. It was more of, man, you're opening a can of worms by having that stretch of a time, and there were things in Endgame that didn't make sense because of that stretch of time for me.
Yeah, I just requested that you name. All right, we'll talk about it later, I guess.
I'll have to dive deeper into that.
Okay.
You sent it to me right now. I have to think about that. I just remember at the time there were definitely things about Endgame.
That's your point of contention. I figured you'd had a couple of examples to back that up. Obviously not.
I didn't think we'd bring that up today. I didn't have my cheat sheet ready. I'll put it together.
Gotcha.
Segment next week. Problems with Endgame.
We'll see.
By this guy. And number one on the list is not the pose either. It's up there though, but not that. It's not that.
Yeah, I don't know what 5 years has to do with that at all.
So one of the things it doesn't. This is one of my independent problems with Endgame. One of the things
that wasn't the point of the discussion
about Black Widow that people talked about. We touched upon this a couple weeks ago when the reviews started coming out, and it was the idea that this movie is too little, too late. Right? I think someone even had that as the cover of the title of their article. But I did find one. It was from The Verge, and this is post the movie coming out, so it's not it's not a review. It's more an opinion. It's an editorial. It's by a writer named Alex Kranz. She's the managing editor for The Verge, and she writes, "It's too late for Black Widow. Marvel's latest film thoroughly skewers the franchise's portrayal of Black Widow. Far too late." She writes, "It's hard to be a fan of the Marvel MCU's Black Widow. She sticks out like a sore thumb. The storylines have been so heavily critiqued, they've turned into a punchline on their own. In Age of Ultron, she was crammed into a ham-fisted romance with Hulk. She's repeatedly mocked which she has repeatedly mocked in her titular film, Black Widow. Her big swan dive into oblivion and Endgame for the sake of her boys. The first heroine in the MCU, Natasha often feels like a big joke, and this attempt to rehabilitate her posthumously feels far too little, far too late. I right off the bat, I got to take a little exception. I never felt like she was a joke. I know there's been a lot of talk on social media regarding what, like, Tony Stark's comment in Iron Man 2, right? Like, I want one of that, and how she's very sexualized. They do poke fun of it, you know, Florence Pugh, which, by the way, she's amazing. I got to tell you, I enjoyed her the most, I think, out of everyone. She's just so likable by the end of the, especially by the end of the movie. You just, I don't know, like, you fall in love with her in a way, not in like creepy Florence Pugh.
I do,
way.
or do you?
I think I do. And I think everyone does. I think there's a rating that says, who do you like the most in this? And she's there. So I'm going to use that as the preponderance.
Because I could read off the ratings of Thor, Dark World, and Ragnarok. Do you have your figures in front of you?
I do.
Okay.
Who is most likable?
Mm-hmm.
If you type it into Google, in Black Widow.
In the process of typing in things that you can actually verify,
Florence Pugh comes right up.
See that
there she is.
You can see that Thor is 77%. The Dark World is 66%.
Yeah, but that just means people use the site, though. That's a flawed stat, regardless. That's a flawed stat.
No, they fixed that. They fixed the aggregator.
Oh, they did
because of review bombing. So they fixed those aggregators.
They told you they fixed it.
Okay, so I'm just gonna believe. I'm not gonna believe my lying ears, right? Okay.
Who did you feel was the most enjoyable character in the Black Widow?
That wasn't your point. You were in the midst of trying to make another point because of the article. Don't get distracted.
I'm just saying, I loved Florence Pugh. I just thought she was
fine.
Great. Yeah.
Okay. But you were making another point. So the discussion was going in a completely different direction.
I know, right? Until someone interrupted me. I don't understand why that happened.
I didn't. You said you brought up Florence.
I just said, by the way, I loved Florence Pugh in this movie.
Yeah, and then then you said she was, and everybody loved her, and I'm like, did they? I don't know about that, and that was all. Go on with it.
So I have to say, I never found that Natasha Romanoff was a big joke. I don't understand. Now, Alex is a woman, so I'm, just to specify that the writer is female and she's writing from a female point of view, and I respect that, and I understand that maybe that's how she felt. I always did find it funny that the Black Widow never got any kind of solo treatment until now. I do think there's a validity to that. But she kind of goes on. She says the film itself is the filmmakers speaking through Yelena, who is Florence Pugh, chastising a decade of fetishization by Jon Favreau, Joss Whedon, and the Russo brothers, while neatly establishing that Yelena will be different. When she's talking, she's making fun of the fact that she's always posing. I thought it was, look, I think I love how people like to course correct. I like that people who typically were not the demographic that enjoyed comic book films in the 2000s, all of a sudden who do now, where it becomes a thing that women now kind of wear on their sleeve and say, oh no, I've always loved this stuff. This has always been great. Well, it's not necessarily true either, because the facts and the figures for box office never spoke to it. You can make the argument.
Facts and figures.
Oh yeah, like Elektra, Catwoman bombed, Elektra bombed.
Well, those are bad movies also.
Right. You can make the argument the movies were not very good, and so why would females want it? But again,
I mean, in general, like, you can't say that these movies bombed because no women went to see them. They might have bombed because they were bad movies.
Yeah. But you can even go back so far as Tomb Raider, which did financially well, but was clearly marketed toward, young teenage boys, right? I mean, I think that doesn't
mean that women didn't go see them.
No, I know, but I would say that they were not made for young teenage women necessarily. In fact, I always kind of cringe when in the comic book industry you'd have, kind of over-sexualized characters, but you kind of sit there and go, well, I understand though, because it's 14
What would it entail to make a movie specifically for women as opposed to for boys?
The over-sexualization is what defines it, I think, as
maybe.
Who are you marketing it to? Who's this movie made for? I mean, people love to talk about that on social media now, right? Like, oh, well, this is not made for you. This was, they talk about that comics are for everyone. Well, these comics are not made for you. These comics are made for someone else. That's okay. I mean, you can definitely do that. But I find it interesting that, like, 10 years later, people have these opinions as if 10 years ago was the same status quo as what it is today. I think you had in the 2000s also, you had a sexualization of women that were encouraged by women celebrities. You had the Britney Spears, you had the Christina Aguileras, you had
which is what I say. Like, how do we know that those things were not marketed for women?
Very possible too. Yeah. I mean, just on a personal note, I know a lot of women friends of mine are like, no, I like when they show sexy women on screen. Like it actually makes them, that they like that. People commented
that kind of skews your figures a little bit. Then, that
what?
That assertion. If women are saying that, yeah, no, I was kind of into this even before the course correction,
right?
That kind of skews the figures as to the point where certain movies did well or did not do well because of the portrayal of the women in that,
they whether could, or not. Well, like, it doesn't necessarily have to contradict it, because it still could be marketed toward 14-year-old boys. It could merely be something that women also found interesting, but it wasn't directed toward them.
Right.
Or at least it's not directed toward them the way it is now.
Your point of contention was that because it was marketed towards 14-year-old boys, and obviously it was the audience of 14-year-old boys and no women were involved, which we don't have the aggregation on that to know it for certain. So, like, it is what it is. But, look, I don't know whether or not this movie did anything for the author of the article,
Right.
Her opinions about how she felt about the film are valid.
Yes.
I don't, I don't necessarily see it that way. I don't understand. Well, it's not that I don't understand. There is a tendency to take everything that came before and just to say it was bad, because it was a before time kind of situation, and to not see any of the nuances in it, or, not see any of the good that was done in it. I've had that argument about many things recently, as a matter of fact. So, I mean, I don't know about right or wrong. It's agree or disagree, right? I don't agree necessarily. I do think that the character was sexualized, and I do understand if that's viewed to be problematic. I can understand that, compared to what the character has become.
Yeah.
What was the character always done wrong throughout the entirety of the MCU? I don't agree. Doesn't necessarily mean I think that person is wrong in saying so. I just don't agree. I applied value to her being in these films. I applied value to her character.
Right.
Now, if the argument is that their character was portrayed with no value, or no one valued this character other than as a sexual object, I would disagree with that assertion.
Yeah.
Just from my own perspective. But I don't know whether or not I know well enough to know not to disagree with the possibility that it sent all the wrong messages.
Yeah, and I guess what and you touched upon it for me is the course correction aspect to it, right? 10 years from now, we might have a completely different mindset. In the 2000s, a lot of the mindset, at least in what was being marketed, was sexualization was female empowerment. Female empowerment now looks different than that. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying it was 100%. It was just, there was a lot of marketing.
I don't know if I would say the conclusion was that sexualization was female empowerment. I think one of the tenets of it was that there is empowerment in sexualization.
Right.
It doesn't always have to be degrading.
Right.
But I don't know if I would label that as one of the definitions of female empowerment is sexualization.
No, I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that was.
I don't know if that was the conclusion of that time.
At the time period, I think with a lot of the female pop singers is really where I draw.
Yeah, but that's not all of.
No, I'm not saying it's all of it. I'm not saying. I literally just said that doesn't mean that it is the end all be all. It's not the totalization.
I know what you said. I'm not disagreeing with the way you said it. It's just, I'm saying, you said, one of the things from that era, from the previous decade, was sexualization. It was female empowerment. I disagree with that statement. I think one of the values that were discovered was that there can be
Yeah.
female empowerment in sexualization, but I would not label it sexualization as female empowerment primarily.
That's fair enough. Like I can go along with that. To my point, it's not the end all be all of female empowerment. If that's how it came across, that's not what I was saying. However, that was definitely one aspect that women of the time could lean on, especially celebrity women. In interviews would talk about that. How.
Yeah, I think you still can.
They can, but I think it's different now, isn't it? I think there's definitely a different tone to the masses and what female empowerment, is in mass consumption, I would say.
I think that, all right, maybe so, but I think the conclusion is that there's female empowerment wherever a woman finds her empowerment.
Sure.
I think it's a broad spectrum now, more so than any one focal point, which is a mistake that society makes all the time as to what,
Yep.
It gives you a very narrow window and says, can you shine through this window? And then
right.
And then tells you that that's your window, but we all know that's BS anyway. So
yeah, no. The only other thing I do agree with though in this article is she says it's a pity Natasha is still dead, as Scarlett Johansson is done with the franchise, because for a few minutes we got what we'd been promised 12 years ago, when Emily Blunt was first rumored to be joining the nascent MCU as Black Widow. The movie was fun, and there are moments in there that are even excellent, but it all feels far too little, far too late. It does kind of suck where this was an enjoyable movie. Like they made something that was worth going back to theaters for myself. It was something that, again, it was a female empowerment movie without ever getting preachy or beating things over the head with the message. There was no message. It stood upon itself as something that was female empowerment by just being a really good movie and having solid.
Now that you've explained that was female empowerment done right.
I don't know. I would sit there and say that female empowerment changes with the times. And for the time it is coming out right now, it's fantastic. It stands on itself. It speaks for itself. The movie speaks for itself. There was no, I was sitting there. I mean, I know I had heard some complaints about maybe the villain was a little preachy and a little messagey, but I never got that from him. I never got that from the end of it. I just got a terrible human being who.
So you would disagree with that then?
Yeah, I would disagree.
Because you didn't feel that way about it.
Yeah, I don't feel that there was any preachiness to it, really. I didn't feel like there was nothing hitting me over the head with any messages. It was just a really solid movie starring female characters. And that's, to me, the best way to approach that topic.
Yes, the best way for them to find their own empowerment is to do it in a manner that's really innocuous.
No, it's to create good storytelling. It's to create good work. That's, at the end of the day, for me, what denotes that. What do you guys think? Did Black Widow hit the right notes for you? Are you sad to see Scarlett Johansson gone? Are you excited for Florence Pugh showing up in future MCU films, as was hinted? We'll discuss all that, and we'll tie it into the Loki season finale, which just aired today, how it's all connected, and how Loki gave fans exactly what they wanted and what I did not want. Coming up next.